I'm Jimmy Kemp, president of the Jack Kemp Foundation, and today we're here at my mother, Joanne Kemp's home, as part of the Kemp Legacy Project, which is the cornerstone of the Jack Kemp Foundation, where our mission is to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea. Our mission was inspired by my dad, Jack Kemp, and today we have the pleasure of talking to many of the men who traveled with my dad throughout his career. I'm sure it's going to be an incredibly entertaining discussion, and this is part of the Kemp Oral History Project led by Mort Kondracki. And we're very grateful to Mort for his leadership and the time that he spent talking to so many people from throughout Dad's career. We hope you enjoy this as we've enjoyed getting all the gang back together again, so to speak. So I now turn it over to Mort Kondracki.
I'm Mort Kondracki. Today is September 6, 2012. We're at Jack and Joanne Kemp's residence in Bethesda, Maryland. And this is the symposium we're entitling On the Road. So first, what I want everybody to do, starting with Michael O'Connell, is to, and then Michael Castine, and go back and forth, is to introduce yourself, say what years you traveled with Jack, how you got your job, and then what was your continuing relationship with Jack after you left his immediate employ. Michael O'Connell.
Thank you, Mort. I'm Michael O'Connell. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I moved to Washington in 1981 to work for Jack as assistant everything, driver, you name it. I got the job because the Thanksgiving before I was in a local watering hole at Thanksgiving and ran into Michael Castine, said I wanted to come to Washington. He had my resume. He called me in early December, said I have a job for you as a driver with the transition team. That wasn't going to work out. He called me about 3 weeks, 4 weeks later. It was probably the second week of January. Said, I've got a job for you. I've taken a job with the administration. I said, Michael, I just bought a house, and literally I'm talking to you sitting on the bedroom floor with the phone and nothing else in my bedroom. He said, well, that's good. Here, Jack wants to talk to you. And I had a conversation with Jack, and a week later, I was on a plane the day after Super Bowl talking to Jack. Karen Schmitzky wasn't going to let me in because Sharon wasn't there that day, and I wasn't on the calendar, but Jackie McLaughlin and Michael were talking to each other from the White House and got me in to see Jack, and a month later I moved down and started right after President's Day in February.
So how long did you spend in the job?
I was with Jack for 4.5 years. Ended up being special assistant, and Sharon and I were trying to figure it out yesterday, but in October of '84, Jack and I traveled to about 35 or 40 cities in the month of October. He was number 3 on the campaign circuit for speakers, so we did a lot of traveling. Had a few incidents I'll share with you later.
Okay. Michael Castine.
Yes, I started as an intern in the office in 1976, back when it was a good thing to be an intern. And I was there for just 3 or 4 months and then went back to the district and met Pat Brunner, who was working in the local office back in Buffalo, where I'm originally from, as Michael mentioned. And Pat got me involved with the campaign, and we were working on the campaign, and I don't even think Jack was opposed at that time, but our goal was to get over 90% of the votes in his favor, and I think we ended up with like 93% of the people voted for Jack that year in 1978. And so the campaign ended, and I kept doing my day job that I had back in Buffalo. And I remember this so vividly. It was a Wednesday night in December. The phone rang, and I got the same type of call that Michael got. Jack wants to talk to you. And he said, can you be here tomorrow? So I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And I got on a plane and flew down, and he said, I'd like you to come back and take over. It was Bernie Hines and Joe Gioni were the 2 guys ahead of me. I was the 3rd one who had this type of role, sort of jack of all trades, or we used to call it the aide to Kemp. So I started in January of, or December rather, of 1978, I believe, and stayed through '81. Was asked to interview at the White House and got a job at the White House day 1 in the Reagan administration. So I went from intern to staff to friend of the family.
Ed?
Ed Brady. I worked from the '86 to '88 during the presidential campaign, and I met Jack. I actually volunteered for the Michigan operation, Michigan Opportunity Society. I worked for Clark Durant, and had met Jack coming in a few times doing some political organizing in the state of Michigan. And after Michigan ended, I had asked to come to Washington. I'm from Illinois, so I was traveling in the Midwest, asked to come to Washington, and John Maxwell hired me, in fact, to take my future wife's position. She moved up, I came in after her, and I did some political stuff in Iowa and New Hampshire, did some advance for Ann Stanley and Scott Reed, and had met a lot of the Kemp family actually in Iowa and traveled with Jeff a little bit. And Jack needed somebody to travel with, and so on a plane from, if I remember right, from Des Moines to Joliet, Illinois, he had asked me to, if I would be interested. And came back to Washington and talked to Jeff and had some conversations on what it entailed. And 2 weeks later, I was on the plane with him as well. And my wife was good friends, best friends with Jennifer Kemp, and so we've got a family history and have, in fact, Joanne was in our wedding, and have a family history still going on.
JT?
JT Taylor. I've got many different lives with the Jack Kemp organization and family. Started off as the aide to Kemp. When Jack was Secretary of HUD, I inherited that from Bill Dalcall. Worked with Bill, Scott Reed, and Sharon Zalaska throughout the HUD years. Moved from there to help run Jack's PAC with Bill and others in the mid-90s. Moved to Capitol Hill for a couple of years, then Jack was picked as Dole's VP nominee, and I jumped back onto the campaign for, 3 months back in 1996. Back to the Hill, and then became the president of Empower America in 2001, until Jack, Jimmy, and I formed Kemp Partners back in 2002 through 2009. So almost 9 lives.
Rick?
My name is Rick Ahern. I first met Jack in 1978 when he was traveling on an RNC cut taxes by 33 1/3% trip to Chicago, and as a member of the Reagan White House staff, I interacted with him on a number of occasions. After the inauguration of President Bush, I was seeking a position in the Bush administration, and I was talking to my old friend Ed Rollins, a mutual friend of mine and the Kemp family, and he said, well, I'd like you to go talk to Jack Kemp. And I said, no, Ed, I don't think that's going to be a good mix. I don't think there'll be a fit there. And just from our interactions over the last few years, and he said, no, really, you got to go talk to Jack. I think you're wrong. I think you guys would get along. I said, I really don't think it's going to work. And he said, well, will you please just go meet with Jack? So I said, well, of course. All right. So I was given Sharon's name. We didn't know each other then. And he had already begun at HUD. This was right after the inauguration in '89. And Sharon set up a meeting for me with him in his office at HUD. And I went over and met with him. And we actually hit it off a lot better than I expected we would. And he said, well, look, how do you feel about it? I said, I'm just not sure I'm the right guy to come to this department. I'm not sure how we would interface. And he said, well, I think it'd be better than you think. Will you give it a try? And I said, well, I'd be delighted to give it a try. And we clicked, and he made me a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, and I set up his schedule and advance shop, and he turned out to be the most sought-after cabinet member for domestic travel during that administration because of his dynamic speaking ability and his willingness to go out and campaign for people no matter where and when. I continued working for him after we left office and right up until through the 1996 campaign when I was Director of VP Operations, as he was selected by Bob Dole as his running mate, and then Empower America, then after at Empower America up to the 96 campaign, and then I became president of the PAC. He started after the 96 campaign and traveled with him until leaving his organization and joining the Forbes campaign in 1999. So it was 10 years that we traveled together, and we had a lot of fun.
Good, Bill.
I'm Bill Dowcall. I first went to work for Jack at HUD in February of 1989 and worked through various capacities till 1996. At HUD, I started out in the Office of Intergovernmental Relations, then got tasked with briefing books, which Sharon warned me about, and everything was true. Then traveled with Jack on and off through the HUD years, then over to Empower America. Like JT, I followed as president of Empower America on an appropriate day, December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, and that could sum up the Empower America experience, now known as the birthplace of Paul Ryan, which Jack would be extremely proud of, to say the least. And then took a leave from Empower America to run Steve Forbes' presidential race in '95, which truly in most of our hearts was the Kemp '96 campaign. Post the campaign, came back to Empower America, and then left again when we ran in '96 when Jack was the VP nominee, and then went back one more time to select a new president for Empower in '97, and then formed a think tank for Steve Forbes called Americans for Hope, Growth, and Opportunity, which was largely based on all Jack's ideas. And the relationship with Jack post Empower America was usually weekly or daily phone calls in reference to tax policy or growth.
Okay, so what does the traveling staffer for Jack Kemp do? I mean, what was your range of activities? What was a day like? What was a trip like? Michael O'Connell.
Well, my trips were early, and it was a matter of being everything. You had to be in touch with Sharon, make sure we were in the right place at the right time. Do something when the helicopter doesn't show up in Nyack, New York, and you wait, and finally the helicopter comes, and you get over to Westchester and can't land, and the guy's going down like this, and finally Jack reaches over and says, "Hey, tell them to take it up, we're going to crash." You go back, call a taxi cab, go over the bridge that they didn't want us to drive over, and fly off to the next stop. And in between there, you're on the phone. In those days, we didn't have anything but a pager, and so make sure Jack was in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people and getting cards and following up.
Coffee in the morning?
Oh, yeah. Every morning.
I had to think back.
Promptly.
I was a long time ago.
When I was working with Jack, everything was more local. So a lot of what I would be doing is getting in the car with him, and we'd be going to some local hotel, and he always had a stack of papers. And what was fascinating, it took me a few days to figure this out, but the car would get going, and you'd ask him a question, and he wouldn't even respond. He wouldn't even look up, and he'd have his notes going. He'd be drawing and ripping articles out of the newspaper. And what it really, once you figured it out, he was gearing up to go onto the football field. You know, he was really getting charged up. And we'd go walk into the hotel, literally running into the hotel. The first place he would go would be the staff area in the restaurant. And he would go and shake everybody's hand. He'd have 300 CEOs waiting for him, but he would go in and shake all the staff's hand and say, "These are my people." And you know, he would get to know every one of them, look them all in the eye and say, "Hi, Jack Kemp." And so one of the times I was with him, that just the big thing for me would be if whoever was holding this event would say, "Hey, why don't you join us for lunch?" instead of standing in the back and you get a free meal out of it. So one day I'm sitting there in a meeting, and I've heard the speech many times before, and all of a sudden I found myself clapping, getting caught up in the moment. And I said, "Damn, he's got me too." And so we left, and but it was all of the above. A lot of the stuff I did, Sharon and I were laughing about this earlier. It was everything from keeping the car gassed up. Now, when I was there, it was during the gas and oil crisis. So their lines would be a mile or two down the road. You had to have an odd or even tag on your license plate. So I was going into the getting to know the owners of this gas station, and would show up with bottles of wine, cases of beer, pictures signed from Jack, whatever it took. And I would pull in, and they would open the garage door, and I would pull right in, and somehow they filled up the car in the garage. I don't know how they ever did this, but they would just let me run, and off we would go. So I could go on for hours. The other place where we did was one of the big events, and one of the turning points in Jack's career was the Detroit Convention. And that's where he was really one of two or three that were looking like it was going to be a VP candidate. And one quick story on that, when it finally came down and Jack did not get it, you know, Jack, he was unbelievable. He was just such a great statesman and a diplomat and a professional about everything. He just said, "Well, we got to go congratulate George Bush." And we immediately went to George Bush's suite, knocked on the door, and Jack walked in and said, "I want to congratulate you. This is great."
Okay.
Great statesman and a diplomat on everything, huh? We'll get back to that one.
You can
No, why
attest to it, Rick.
don't you just go? Why don't you just go with that thought? We'll go around again. Go ahead.
Joanne's sitting here, Rick.
I know Joanne's sitting here.
Come on,
Joanne
come
will
on.
remember some of the, well, part of my role was not just doing his travel arrangements, but we also had a lot to say about politics and made suggestions to him on a regular basis. And there were a number of occasions where we strongly disagreed, and we had a number of battles royal. I can recall one time when we were in California. Joanne was not on this trip, and he was going up to the Nixon Library to endorse, I think it was Proposition 527, or speak against it. Actually, he was going to speak against it, and we were getting calls from everyone. This was before the after the '96 campaign, when we were talking and hoping that he might consider running for president down the road. And we'd get into these arguments. I said, politically, you just can't do this, Jack. I mean, you're going to alienate every Republican voter in every border state there is. California, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, everywhere illegal immigration is an issue. And got to the point where he threw me out of his suite, which he regularly did. But then the next day, or a few hours later, we'd talk it over, and he'd laugh, and I'd laugh, and we'd patch everything up. Then there was another time at the convention in Houston, where he was having a disagreement with certain people in the White House, like Dick Darman, over budgetary matters.
And Jim Baker.
And Jim Baker. And he was going to get up, and you'll remember this one, I think, Joanna. He wanted to get up and give his speech. He was speaking to the convention, and he was going to lambaste the president's proposed budget. And so we had another heated discussion in his suite, where Joanne was present. I said, you cannot do this as a member of the cabinet. If you want to give this speech, you have to resign from the cabinet. You cannot get up at the president's renomination convention and criticize his budget. And he got very perturbed, very angry, and they said, you're not Ed Rollins. And I said, no, I'm not, but if he were here, he'd agree. And again, we had a lot of disagreements, but they were short-lived, and we laugh about them a couple of hours later. So he was great to work with, but it was always a challenge and always exciting.
Ed, so back to the, so what did you have to do? What was the trip like?
Yeah, I think the biggest task we had was to keep him on track, keep him on schedule. So whether if we were in town here and we're flying out of Dulles, there'd be many days that I'd be driving down 66, going 80, passing him because I was supposed to be there first. And meeting him at the airport, meeting him at the airport with the 4 or 5 newspapers and ready to go. If you're on the road in the hotel, you've got your briefing sheet. 7:05, you're supposed to knock on the door with coffee and newspapers, and so you do it 7:05 and 7:10 and 7:15, and by 7:20, he's out the door and all during the day, communicating with Sharon in the office and the press office. To make sure that he was on track, not only on track on time, but on track on who he was supposed to speak to, who was going to be in the room, briefing him as you're walking down the hall. So, in fact, I got to tell one story that I thought was funny, not at the time, but afterwards. Is I knock on the door, we get in the hallway. We're in a Holiday Inn, I think, in Des Moines, Iowa. Or in Iowa somewhere, and we're walking down the hall, and I hand him the index card, and it's got all the briefing material on it. So he's asking questions, and he's looking at the card, I'm looking at the card, and sure enough, you know where there's a double door, there's a middle piece to the double door? Jack hits it right in the forehead. He looks at me, doesn't say a word, and just moves on. And that was Jack. I mean, he didn't express some of his emotions all the time, but you knew they were there. He complained about his wrist that afternoon a few times in some colorful language, but our job was to keep him on task, work with the offices, and make sure that he was on track.
Okay, JT?
Yeah, that's actually funny. My very first day in the job, I think it was with Bill, the hook on my garment bag as we're walking through the airport. Chicago O'Hare got caught in my ankle. I tripped and fell on my knees in a suit in the middle of the airport. Jack turned around and looked at Bill and shook his head and just
said, keep walking.
Just keep walking.
And it wasn't one hook. You had 2 garment bags, because
true.
of course, why travel light?
Yeah.
2 garment bags,
I had no
2
idea.
legal briefcases.
Yeah.
So you couldn't grab anything. We're standing behind JT. The hook grabs one leg, and Jack goes, "Watch this." He's trying to shake it loose. Then the hook gets the other leg, and down he goes. Jack says, "Don't help him. Keep walking right around." And we did his first day. Yes,
Yeah,
that
but
was
it
a
was-
fun
That
one.
was your first day on the job.
Very first on this
as a body guy.
as the body guy. But always newspapers. I mean, you could be in Nome, Alaska, and he'd ask for the Washington Post or the New York Times.
What do you mean you don't have it?
What do you mean you don't have the yearbook? And then it started. Then he would like the major articles from the Post or the Times faxed to whatever hotel you were staying. So it was coffee, newspapers in the morning, the wake-up calls, and of course, every once in a while he'd misplace his DOP kit, which was sacred, as we all know.
The hairdryer.
The hairdryer.
Hairdryer.
Hairspray.
Oh, the hair dryer and the hairspray.
Oh, really?
Not good. Not good.
How did he react to Bob Forehead, by the way? I mean, I didn't know that he had a hairdryer. So he was cartoonized as Bob Forehead. I mean, how did he react to that?
He just kept going.
Didn't
He-
acknowledge
he-
it.
it didn't bother him one
not too
bit.
much
I mean,
bothered
he,
Nothing
he,
bothered him.
I always wanted to ask that
he
question.
was going to look the way
Somebody.
he wanted to look.
Anybody else have anything about what the routine was like, or what the trip was like?
Absolutely. In addition to newspapers, coffee, it was the first age of cell phones. So you had the 3-pounder or the 5-pounder, and you were required to A, know how to dial it, and B, know every number of every friend he had in any given city, thank God for Sharon, and get them on the line. And then explain to them how the cell phone doesn't work every place. Right. That was never good. And then the other big project was counting the bags. Always making sure that when he left someplace, you left with what you came with. And my first hair-raising experience, no pun intended, being follically challenged, is we're in Santa Barbara, California, at Fess Parker's Winery. We have to fly down to LA to get a flight to go back to the East Coast. So of course we're late. It's Clarence Day, Doug Duval, myself, and Jack. We've got all the bags. Jack had a garment bag, 2 legal briefcases, and the alligator skin hairdryer bag. We load them ourselves onto the nose of the plane. As we're going through the metal detectors and the x-ray machine, everybody wants his autograph. So they stop the machine. Everybody who works at the airport stops working, comes over to get autographs. The pilot wants us to go, and we got to get Jack moving. We get on the plane. We land at LAX, and they drop the stairs down, and the guy's in the front of the plane taking the bags out. And Clarence Day is sitting next to me, and he elbows me and almost breaks my ribs. "What's the matter, Clarence?" "Bill, there's a bag missing." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I counted them. There's a bag missing." We get off the plane. Rusty Paul meets us. Got to rush to get the next flight. I go back. I'm in the nose of the plane. Where the hell is this bag? Because guess which bag's missing? The hairdryer bag. Jack yells, "Bill, they'll find your bag. Don't worry about it." I said, "It's not my bag." He goes, "Whose is it?" I said, "Yours." That was good for 5.5 hours flight on the way back on the plane of, "Hey, Bill lost a bag." And the only thing that gave me comfort, Ed, was knowing you lost the coat. And the coat came back, and the bag arrived the next day.
More importantly than that, the one thing that I think I'm probably remembered for is part of our job was to clean up after him and make sure we had the bags and the coats and everything else. And I did lose the coat in St. Louis, if I remember right, and I swear Alan Aldred, or I think he's still got the coat, just to spite me. But
He probably does.
the one thing that I did lose that he claims I lost is, as you're sitting in the back of a plane, you got cup holders, and Jack would always take his rings off, just to relax, he'd take his rings off. And sure enough, I lost the AFL championship ring because he didn't pick it up out of the cup holder, and so I think I'm probably known for that.
Michael
You
had
got it back.
No, we never. I think was there a duplicate made? Yeah. There was a duplicate made, but nonetheless, I'm the one.
Somebody's got an AFL championship ring.
Some cleanup guy at the airport.
So who packed him? Did he pack himself, or?
Yeah.
Huh?
I couldn't answer that one.
Okay, all
On
right.
the road,
It's one we didn't do.
He packed himself on the road.
You would go through the room, though, and make sure like there wasn't a suit hanging in the closet
Yeah.
or a shirt, because that was
Right.
going to happen.
Exactly.
And if you had a black tie event on the road, you always made sure you knew where to go get cufflinks or a bow tie, because guaranteed he A, lost his, or B, didn't bring them.
And there were a lot of borrowed bow ties from waiters.
A lot of $20 bills in
Speaking
kitchens.
of black tie dinners, there was one time when I went with him, this was after HUD, and he was a key speaker at a Heritage Foundation dinner. I believe it was in California, and he did something he never used to do. He said, I'll take this bag. It was a small garment bag that had his dinner jacket and his tux. And I said, really? He said, I'll take that, I'll take that. So he took it, and he hung it in the front closet of the plane, or the flight attendant did. And we're getting off the plane, and I said, okay, what about the garment bag? He said, no, I'll take care of it, I'll take care of it. So we got off the plane, and we had left the airport, we're getting in the car, or we left the terminal, getting in the car, and I turned to him, I said, he stopped to buy some papers or something, and he caught up with me, and I said, where's the garment bag? And he said, don't you have it? I said, no, you said you'd take it off the plane. And so he was traveling, not even in a sport coat, he was traveling in very casual clothes, like a yellow shirt and a pair of khakis or something, like a pair of slacks. And the plane left. And so we had a lot of good friends at United Airlines, thank the Lord, the Carol Washburn especially, and at Nashville Airport. They would fix any problem they could. So I called her immediately, and they met the plane at its next stop, and they found the bag, and they got it back. However, that evening, we had to go in the hotel to a men's store and buy a blazer and buy some trousers, and there was no time to get them altered, and so I had to take Scotch tape and hem his trousers, and they kept falling down. And so we're in the in the ballroom at a black tie dinner, and the hem on his trousers kept falling down. So it was very embarrassing, frankly, to have to go up and keep Scotch taping the hems of the trousers. But this stuff happened all the time.
He's speaking? I mean, you're not, he's not speaking.
No. I wouldn't interrupt the speech. But I mean, he was walking around shaking hands, and the hem would fall down. Before he went on stage, we'd have to go off in the corner and tape the trousers again. It was never a dull moment.
Okay.
I was just going to say on the shaking hands thing, it probably happened to all of us. You'd say, Jack, that's Joe Smith over there. He's a big contributor, and you may want to say hello. And Jack would go and say, "Hi, I'm Jack Kemp. What's your name?" And wouldn't listen to you at all. And so it's just
one more thing about routine, though, is, and Rick, this probably fell more into Rick's camp than anything. His team would time and again find the shortest route from A to B, right?
Exactly.
So he was just hell to be within any drive over 10 minutes. One day, and Michael talking about Long Island, something about Noyak brought this back up again, but we were going to drive from the city to the island because the weather was, there was a fog coming in. He wouldn't hear anything of it. He goes, let's take the helicopter. And he wasn't a big fan of helicopters, but he said, let's take the helicopter. So we get in the helicopter, fog is starting, and a mist is starting to come in. Same thing that happened to you. Helicopter goes down once, and then we are probably a story or two from the Long Island Sound. And all of a sudden, his right hand goes into my left knee and just puts a grip on it. And he starts screaming and yelling at the pilot, and let's get this thing down. Pilot goes back up, comes back down, does it a second time. And then, he found another place in my knee that wasn't bruised, and dug his claws in there. And then finally we got on the ground, and I said, we should have taken the car, shouldn't we? And he shook his head at me and goes, yeah. He didn't talk to me for the rest of the day.
It was your fault.
It's my fault.
That's an identical story. That's so funny.
Yeah.
It's almost identical.
Yeah, but drive times, I mean, he was not fun to be with. If it went over if it said 10 minutes on the schedule, if it was 11 minutes.
There was only one city he was great at with driving, L.A. Because wherever the driver got, Jack could get us out of whatever traffic jam, back streets. The only city, he thought he could do it other places, but L.A. was great.
He would regularly do it in places he'd never been before. He'd never been to a city before. We'd be driving along, and we'd be stuck in traffic. He'd start complaining about the traffic. I said, Jack, we told you it's rush hour. That's why I tried to get you to leave the hotel on time, but we're 20 minutes late. Well, we're going to be late. Well, we're going to be late because you left your room 20 minutes late. And we're going to be late because it's rush hour. And that's the way it is. There's nothing we can do. That's just life. And then he'd get on with the driver. He said, "Do you sure you know where you're going? Are you sure you know where you're going? By the way, is there any factory air in this car? Turn up the air conditioning." They turn up the air conditioning. A couple of minutes later, "It's freezing in here. Turn down the air conditioning." He did that consistently.
Within my first couple of weeks, maybe a month, we were going out to Andrews to meet. I think we were getting Air Force One. Joanne, you were in the car. And I had an idea of how we should go, and he was hell-bent on going out East Capitol. Right? I'm not sure which one, the one that goes behind the Capitol. And we were supposed to go out towards Andrews and the Parkway and all that. And we got almost out to the RFK Stadium before he finally gave in. I don't know if you remember this, and finally said, all right, where are we supposed to go? I said, let me drive. And I just did it. He insisted.
So you told great stories. So what is your all-time favorite Kemp story? I mean, if you were going to tell your grandchildren one Kemp story, what would it be? And we can go around as many times as you like. Michael?
I'm going to pass to Ed.
That's a tough question.
You know, my favorite's really not political. It kind of gives you the flavor of Jack Kemp. He used to love to play tennis. Had a bad knee. He limped a lot, and he always complained about the knee quietly. But he was very strong in the sense that he went through some pain. But Barney Skladany was always his tennis partner, and if Barney couldn't play, he had to play tennis. So 25-year-old Ed Brady got to play tennis with him, and you know, I go into that tennis match thinking, what am I going to do? I'm a high school tennis player. I'm not a great tennis player, but you know, he's 52 years old. I should be able to beat him 25 years old. And we're playing tennis, and he is just sweating his tail off and working harder than. And I'm kind of nonchalant because I really don't know if I'm supposed to try and beat him or not beat him. You know, am I going to get back on the plane with him or not? Well, I hit a drop shot, and he's at the baseline, and he goes flying across the court and takes a dive and skins his forehead, his shoulder. He makes a shot, and he wins the point. And I turn around, I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? And it was his competitive spirit. I mean, it was not only in politics, in people, in sports, everything. It kind of gave you the flavor of Jack Kemp, that he gave it everything. And I still remember and tell my kids this story about the competitiveness and the will to win, the will to do the best that you can. And it was something as a 25-year-old seeing this congressman running for president, to dive across the court. He jumped up, didn't say a word, didn't smile, it was just part of him.
Anybody else? Favorite story?
Oh, there's so many, but one that came to mind, I don't know, it's sort of current in a way, because we were racing to the airport one day, and in those days you could pull right up to National Airport and park right in the front.
Underneath.
And no, this was even before that. They had a little lot like 20 feet from the little gated thing. Yeah. So we get out of the car, and all of a sudden this little Fiat is coming up, and he goes, watch this, this is going to be great. So this Fiat comes up, and it's Al Gore in the Fiat, and he goes, Al, why don't you meet Michael Castine? And he introduces me, which he didn't always do. And so we're talking, and he goes, Al, how can you drive a foreign car? You're a congressman. This was back when he was in Tennessee. And he just berated Al Gore. And Gore's like sitting there doing this, he didn't even know what to say. And I just said, nice to meet you, Congressman. And we walked away, and this guy was just a crumpled mess after Jack just pummeled him for driving a foreign car.
Yeah, well, he got in trouble one day because I had a BMW when I started, and I forget how he ended up, but I had to take him. I had to get him to the airport and take him to the Capitol. And we pull up, and you can pull up right in front of the Capitol and drop him off, and I go back and park my car. About 2 hours later, I guess it was Mac, was press at the time, gets a call and says, what's Jack doing driving around a BMW? He never rode in my car again. We were always in the Thunderbird.
Anybody else? Favorite story? All time.
I think for me there's two that tie it, but the first one Sharon will remember very, very well. 1991 APEC conference. We at that point had kind of gotten the then Daddy Bush administration a little riled up with some of the things we'd been doing, and they knew we were going to APEC. So the Secretary of State, Jim Baker, let it be known that the HUD Secretary should talk about housing. Not housing on the West Bank, housing in general. Nothing about land for peace. Say nothing. And Mary Burnett, Tom Humbert, myself, Sharon in his office before the speech, leaving. Absolutely, he's not going to say anything, no problem. Goes off to the APAC conference. Couldn't have been done 10 minutes, and Edie Holiday calls me. And I had to hold the phone about 3 feet from my ear because she's screaming. He did it. He said it. What did he say? He said not an inch of land for peace. Jack comes blowing back into the office as the tornado always did. Sharon, Mary, and I go in the office and say, Jack, did you say anything at the speech that we might want to be aware of? No, nothing. You said nothing at the speech? No, I didn't. Why would I say anything? Dial up a staffer who got sent over to do advance named Howard Mortman because he had been big with AIPAC and wanted to be there for the speech. I put it on speaker. Jack is sitting in a chair tilted back as he always did, on the verge of falling over. And I said, Howard, how was the Secretary's speech? Oh, it was awesome. Anything memorable? Yes, he said, not an inch of land for peace. There was a cat grin on his face, and we scored. And then the second story would be the '92 convention, which Rick brought up earlier. But more importantly, not only the speech, but how he was received, and the fact that we had snuck in 40,000 Kemp 96 signs in through the ABC News trucks, thanks to Sherry Rollins. And when he got up to speak, the reaction within the place was nothing but awesome. And Tim Russert was standing right next to me as he was speaking, and you could see he owned Tim. And it was like, oh yeah, there's a '92 election, but who cares? This is about down the road. And the Quail people just loved it immensely, needless to say. Yes.
Right. So what do you think are Jack's outstanding character traits, both strengths and weaknesses? But let's start with strengths. Michael?
Well, when you were asking about the favorite story, this came to mind. It was the '84 swearing in of the president, and it was freezing, and they moved it inside. And my parents had come down, and Sharon had helped, and we gotten tickets and all this great stuff. We ended up in the office, and Joanne was playing a wonderful hostess, and Jack came in and was just very warm to my parents. And it really touched me because there was just that personal side of Jack, and things he said about me were like, wow, thanks. And it was nice. I mean, Jack could be tough and gruff, but he was also a great man.
Yeah, I would agree. And some of my best times with Jack were after I left the staff. He would be in New York, and he would be say, come to a luncheon, and I would go, and he'd say, I want you to sit next to me. Which in the old days we'd be in the back of the room, but he would talk and say, let's get together. And one time it was unbelievable. We're sitting at this. He was part of a forum. I think he was one of the co-hosts, and at the Harvard Club in New York, and he said, there's a group of us standing there, and he said, please excuse us. Michael, can you come with me? I'd like to talk to you alone. And I was sort of blown away by that because these guys were CEOs of companies, and we went downstairs and we had lunch, just the two of us, and had just a really nice discussion. And then another time, my wife and I, we just gotten married. It was 1987, and we moved to Darien, Connecticut. And I think Sharon had told us that Pete Gogolak, who was an old buddy of Jack's, lived in the town. And so we get invited to this thing. We go meet Pete, and he's really gracious. And so we're kind of standing around not knowing anybody. And nobody's really talking to us. They're talking to Pete and everybody else. All of a sudden, Jack comes bursting into the room. And the first thing he says, where's Michael and Ann? And, and we were sort of like, wow, this is unbelievable. And he came over and gave us a big hug. Congratulations, great. And after that, everybody in the room came by to say hello to us. It was, so we had our blessing. But, really just tremendous.
Everybody says that he cared about little people. Yeah. That you refer to greeting people in the kitchen and stuff like that, and bureaucrats at HUD as well, right?
Absolutely.
So what was that about? I mean, why do you think he did that?
His compassion for people, and particularly for those less fortunate or downtrodden or those perceived as less, was overwhelming. I mean, his strengths were clearly his passion, his search for ideas, his curiosity, and his biggest strength was his compassion. It was genuine, it was real, it was, and from a weakness standpoint, timeliness. Late we were going to be.
Because he was blowing his schedule by spending
his time with people. Yeah. He did not leave a room if he thought someone was there to see him. He went up and acknowledged them.
Whether it be a political speech or whether he'd be in an inner city project, visiting with families, he would just stay. And no matter, you could look at your watch all you wanted. You could give him the high sign, the let's get out of here sign. It would never ever matter. He would want to stay and connect with every single person in that room. And it just wasn't HUD. It was in every. Since I had the fortunate happenstance to be in a number of different iterations, it was at HUD. It was after HUD, it was Kemp Partners Empower America. I mean, it just lasted through every single day of his life.
It went to the, as you'd leave a big ballroom, he'd want to talk to the bartender, and if you'd walk through the kitchen, it'd take another 5 minutes, because he would introduce himself, shake their hands, and thank them. To the drivers and the volunteers around the country. He really showed sincerity and thanks for the people that were helping him and helping the country.
Was it just a meet and greet and stuff like that, or did he have actual engagement?
Oh, he did.
He'd stop.
Deeply.
Yeah, he'd stop and talk to them.
And usually either get a request that we would try and fulfill, or point them in a direction. No, it was real.
The less important the people, the more important they were to Jack.
Yeah.
I can remember he was speaking to interns over on the Senate side one day, and there was a vote coming up, and Sharon was like, "You have to get him there. You have to get him back." And I'm like, "Okay, I will." So I'm watching the time. I know the vote's coming. The pager goes off. All right, I've got 15 minutes to get him from Dirksen to the Capitol. I'm going, "Jack, we got to go." And he played me off the kids for 12 minutes. And then we ran to, and literally, "Do you want me to go? Michael wants me to go. Do you guys want me to go?" "No." And he'd play and he'd interact and he'd talk to them. And finally, with 3 minutes left, I mean, literally fly across to the Capitol, screech the brakes, he'd run up the stairs.
So let me get this straight. Is somebody with him all the time? I mean, all during the day? I mean, he would go into his office, presumably, and have private meetings, but after he came out, there was always somebody who was running along with him or driving him, or
you'd always meet him at the door, or meet him at the back of the room, or you'd walk up to him and pull him out of the speech, and you'd stand in the back of the room. 40-minute speech is now 60 minutes. You're going like this, and so you're right there. And the only time during the day traveling is we'd have downtime occasionally, not enough.
Very
but that's you'd put him in, take him to his room, and he'd have downtime, and that's about the only time he was alone. I got to say, because I think one of his strengths and weaknesses that you asked was the competitiveness, and I keep going back to that. Competitive because he was competition of ideas, competition of ideology, but it also worked as a weakness at sometimes. He would compete. He would pit consultants or people like a Charlie Black or Ed Rollins against each other. But it was his game. It was his way. I don't know if it's a game or not, but it was his way to vet the ideas that he wanted to be vetted in order to make a right decision. But it was in my mind, and one particular, when I questioned him on David Carman and John Buckley and who was his press secretary at one time on an airplane, I didn't think I was getting back on that airplane. He had never spoken to me the way that he did before.
Just for bringing that question up?
Yeah, just for a guy like, his bad guy, to question him in front of his assistant press secretary and the guy running Iowa, Jim Weber, I just couldn't take it anymore. It was one of those deals where, you got to move forward, and you can't pit these two against each other. You've got a press secretary. One happened to be in New Hampshire, and the other happened to be nationwide. But that sometimes, in my opinion, was a weakness.
So what did he do? He chewed you out, obviously.
He chewed me out, like Rick said. 2 or 3 hours later, after the event, he said, "You doing okay?" Never apologized, nor did I. But are you doing okay? Want to make sure we were okay, and so we moved on.
I would agree with what everybody said about his strengths and his weaknesses, and just another illustration was when he was the nominee for vice president. We had to amend our scheduling practices to expand the allowed time at each event because you could not get him off the rope lines. No. I mean, we'd have very large turnouts in many instances, relatively speaking, for a VP candidate. We don't draw like the presidential nominee always, as we all know.
But on college campuses he did, though.
He'd draw very large on campuses. But he would not leave the rope line. Yeah. And it was not just up to JT to try, and I would try and pull him all the time as well and say, we've got to go. And we were trying, as every nominee does, we were trying to hit 3 or 4 cities a day, so that involved flights to and from events, and we'd be in danger of, by the 4th event of the day, in danger of not being able to hold our crowd because we would run so late. But he loved people, and he felt, and we talked about it, and he would say, if they went to all the effort to come out and see me and they want to shake my hand, I should shake their hands. but there was only so much time in a day where we could build events, and that was a problem.
There was one exception to that in '96, where the Secret Service came up to me and they said they had identified a man in the audience with a gun. And they came up to me and said, look, Jack will want to shake every hand afterwards. So the Secret Service was part of this show as well, and they knew that he had to touch everyone. And they said, you have to get him off the stage as soon as he's finished with his speech, no exceptions. So I went up to him, looked him right in the eye, I said, look, you never listen. I said, listen to me right now. Just walk to that door. I pointed to a door in the corner. I said, just leave the stage, do not shake a hand. Trust me on this one time. He did. I walked with him. The Secret Service pushed him through, cast me aside, and he was safe. And they got the gunman, and who actually had a permit to have the gun, and was a federal marshal. But nonetheless, that's the only time he listened.
I mean, another strength is that he would go places that other politicians, especially Republicans, would never go. Right?
Well, I'll take this one.
These were Rick's favorite stops in America.
Well. The classic example of this one is when he first becomes nominee for vice president, and he insists that we go to Sylvia's Soul Food Restaurant in Harlem, New York. And we had another one of our disagreements over this. There aren't going to be 2 votes at Sylvia's Soul Foods Restaurant. And he said, oh, it'll be great. I'll get my friend Charlie Rangel to come over and be there with us. I said, Charlie Rangel is working against us in the campaign. This is not a great idea. Well, of course, we went to Sylvia's Soul Food Restaurant, and it was packed with people that Jack had gotten to know as Secretary of HUD, and Charlie Rangel was, in fact, there. And he wouldn't leave, as usual, so the event dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. And, of course, the first thing Charlie Rangel did when he walked out of the restaurant was go right over to our traveling press and say, Jack's my very good friend, and he's a wonderful guy, but he shouldn't be vice president of the United States. And he went on to explain why he was supporting our opposition. So yes, he would regularly insist on going places that we had not planned to go and other politicians wouldn't go, because he was truly committed to expanding the base of the Republican Party to include minorities. That was something that he felt very, very strongly about, and it's an admirable quality. And as we see the demographics of the country changing, there are more and more people that are recognizing that now, so he was a visionary in that respect. But it was frustrating at certain times.
He got into a big fight with Pete Wilson over immigration. Yeah,
That's the one I mentioned earlier.
So he went out there to campaign against the proposition that Pete Wilson was advocating.
Well, he didn't go for that reason.
Well, what he did is he got invited out for an event, and the prop was Prop 182.
Oh, I said 257. It was 182.
That was a later one, but 182 came out, and what was interesting is there was a TV commercial produced by a guy named Don Sipple for Wilson, only ran once, that showed the border along Mexico and showed these portrayed illegal immigrants rushing through the gates. That incensed Jack to no end. So at the events, when the question came up about Prop 182 and immigration, Jack teed off. And then on a flight back from California, he happened to sit on the airplane next to Ron Brownstein, who was then with the LA Times. And that was one of the rare occasions when staff wasn't upgraded, because we actually asked to be put back in coach, because it was one of those trips where you did not want to sit next to Mike Wallace on the flight for the 5 hours of 60 Minutes. And Brownstein dug deeper. And Jack let his true feelings know, that he thought it was outrageous, that we're a nation of immigrants, and that these people are only looking for opportunity, and we needed good legal immigration and a way to take care of the situation. Story ran on I believe a Thursday, and we were at Empower America in those days, and I think, Sharon, it's safe to say our phones melted with death threats, you name it, and the Wilson people obviously incensed. But then Empower America, within 24 or 36 hours, I can't remember, Pete Wehner authored a white paper on Empower America's official immigration policy, which was quite the opposite of Pete Wilson.
So he did, and you guys who were there during the HUD years, he obviously spent a lot of time in projects and
everywhere.
And who was on the Watts trip? Anybody?
Watts.
Right after the riots.
I was with him on the Watts.
So tell us about the Watts trip.
Well, the Watts trip.
This was after the Rodney King
This was
riots.
immediately after the Rodney King riots, and we went out there. I went out ahead of time, and Jack came out with the president on Air Force One, and we were tasked by the White House to help find some spots where we could go. We went to a YMCA, I think it was, in East LA, and one of the things that disquieted Jack more than anything else about that trip was a conversation he had with Maxine Waters. And Jack had been obviously a very outspoken advocate for the poor and for those in public housing, trying to improve their lot. He advocated home ownership for people in public housing very strongly. And there was nobody who was a stronger advocate of equal rights than Jack Kemp. And Maxine Waters laid into him. I was in the room, and he held the phone away from his ear. She used the most vile language and accused him of ridiculous things. That it was very upsetting to him. I've lost all respect that I might have had for that woman in that phone call. She deserves no respect, in my opinion, as a public servant, because she absolutely was out of line.
What was she accusing him of?
Well, of racism. And if Jack Kemp was nothing else, it was that he was not a racist. He frequently told the story about when he was first in playing pro football. He told the story all the time that there was I think it was an all-star game, and it was being played in a city in the South, and a bunch of the guys on the team were going to go out to the movies, and the black guys would have had to sit up in the balcony. So the whole team left the theater, and that made a real mark on him. He never forgot that, told that story for the rest of his life, in my presence, and I'm sure in everybody else's presence that's here, repeatedly. So he was a very strong advocate for equal opportunity, equal rights, and Maxine Waters accused him of being the opposite. We had some good events out there. We went everywhere he wanted to go. We shook a lot of hands. We talked to a lot of people. It was very hot. There was no air conditioning either in the events that we attended, nor obviously, I mean, the places had been badly damaged by the riots. So he was well received by the populace in East LA and in Watts when he went out there.
So Britt Hume on ABC reported that Jack was the only, he and Bush are both there at the same time, but the Jack of the entire retinue was the only person who actually went and talked to people along the parade route. Is that true? And the Bush people did not like the news report as a result.
That's my recollection.
Yep.
Yes,
that was true. And he also was the only one who took his jacket off.
Yes, he took
rolled
his
up
jacket
his
off,
sleeves and walked along, and was in with the crowd. So the visual you got was stuffy White House above the fray. Hey, we're doing the whistle stop, and then here's Jack, in with the people, really concerned about the people, and yeah, they were not happy.
How did they express their unhappiness?
Usually with phone calls that were fairly loud and screaming.
Right.
From who?
Usually at that point it was Edie Holliday, who was the cabinet secretary, and then other messages would come through other cabinet officials.
Chief of Staff.
I think was Sam Skinner the chief of staff at that point, because I think Sununu was gone.
Yes, I think it was Sam
and
Skinner.
that would come through, and Sharon can attest to it better than I. There were probably at least one day a month we thought we were going to be fired, maybe more.
Why did you think you were going to be fired?
Well, we had our own foreign policy. We had
Kemp would be
yes,
fired
exactly.
as a cabinet
We're
officer.
done.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
We responded to the earthquake in San Francisco in, I think, 12 hours. The White House took 3 days, so we were out the door first. That was a Kemp operation.
Yeah,
Move
we were
quick,
right out
take
the
care
door
of
on
people,
that.
and go.
And so was it ever seriously possible that he might have been fired as HUD secretary?
I don't think so. I think the closest we probably came was when he was doing Bob Novak's show, Evans and Novak, on a Saturday morning, and Bush had come out with his tax plan at that point for the re-election, and Bob hated it, and he knew Jack really didn't like it, and he kept pushing Jack, and then he had the final big question session, and I believe it was Mary Burnett and I were sitting in the green room, and we're like, oh God, what's going to come? And he said, Mr. Kemp, what do you really think of George Bush's tax plan? Isn't it a scheme? And Jack says, well, Bob, yeah, it is a scheme, and then he tries to recover. That was the soundbite. We get on a plane to fly to Richmond right after that for a fundraiser, and he's telling Mary and I how, no, nobody will report it, it wasn't that big a deal. We walk into a Marriott and had a sliding glass door with a huge colored TV right in the reception. Perfect timing. As we walk in, there's CNN with the soundbite of, "It's a gimmick." And that one I thought for sure.
And then what was the blowback?
The blowback was screaming, yelling, but if I remember right, that was also the weekend of one of the National Governors Association conferences where Joanne and Jack went to a dinner at the White House. And we figured if he's going to hear it, he'll hear it there in the receiving line. And Daddy Bush couldn't have been any nicer. So dodge that bullet. And then one other one was the infamous...
Israel. Jimmy
Yep,
Baker.
you got it. Jim Baker,
New York Post.
Oval Office Conference. And trying to remember who the mayor in New York was, former mayor, Ed Koch. So we get in the car after he leaves the White House, and Jack very rarely was that red, but he was red. Secretary Baker had used the famous F-bomb in terms of the Jewish people. And we get in the car, we go to the airport, and he's steaming. We fly to New York, and because it was New York, Rick didn't do those advances. He let Doug Duvall do it because New York wasn't Rick's favorite city. So we go to 101 Park Avenue, which was Peter Calico's building, to do a fundraiser for Al D'Amato. Clarence and myself walk in with Doug, and Jack's over there talking to Senator D'Amato, and Ed Koch shows up. Jack goes in the corner with Ed Koch. I'm looking at Doug, he's looking at me, I'm going, oh God, he's not. We leave, we get in the car to go to we stayed at the Waldorf Towers that night. We're at the Waldorf Towers, I said, did you say anything to Ed Koch I might want to be aware of? Oh, don't worry, I didn't tell him. I didn't say anything. Famous last words. The next morning, front page of the New York Post. Yeah, that one I thought we were dead.
Front page of the New York Post, what?
Jim Baker, F the Jews. Yes.
So,
of course, there was no source listed. We all knew who it was.
It's worth going back to point one thing out, if I could, about the LA riots. Not only did we go in and talk to victims or a lot of black and Hispanic people, he was also very concerned about the victims of the riot. And we went into a lot of small businesses, people who had been burned out and smashed out and looted out. And he was very concerned, as he was always, about economic growth. He was concerned about small business, and he was across the board compassionate to the people who suffered in that riot.
let me just ask you, why in advance of all this did you think that you didn't want to work for Jack Kemp before you went to HUD?
Well, we had very limited contacts, but it just didn't work out well. I mean, it was kind of like oil and water.
Like what?
Rick is a very structured, organized,
Three-piece suits,
upper class type individual, and Jack comes into a room as a tornado, and schedule goes by the wind, and Rick likes a schedule.
Uniformity.
You know, and everything, and the photo shots got to count, and Jack's answer was, let him take whatever photo they're taking. I'm doing what I do, which drove Rick crazy. And I'm sure the initial view, and you can speak to it better than I, HUD probably didn't particularly entice you.
Well, no, I mentioned that. I mean, I wasn't sure that housing issues were not, HUD was not a burning issue to me. It was not necessarily where I wanted to be in the second administration, the Bush administration.
So none of you was a Bush plant in HUD to watch over Jack?
No.
Right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Nobody.
They might have tried, but they weren't going to get past Sharon, Scott, or Mary.
So one of the other virtues that lots of staff have said is that he was really inclusive with staff, listened to staff, or at least
They believe you.
but heard staff out. Is that fair to say? No?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
HUD, we'd have huge
absolutely.
debates, and then you had Sharon's golden rule at the end of the day. If you really want Jack to do something, ask him to do the opposite. And you'll get what you need.
How did that work?
What you would do is, Jack, I want you to go over here when you really want him over there, and he'd end up over there. And he got onto the game after a while, and he'd play right along with it.
Right. So, and you guys have all sort of explained all this, that not only did his staff love him, but he also drove him crazy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You were never bored. Ever bored.
Never a dull moment. And that's an absolute fair description. You loved him, but he'd drive you crazy.
Oh, Sharon received many phone calls for hours from every place in the world, from from personal experience, from Jerusalem to Dirty Corners, Mississippi.
From staffers?
From me in this case, saying, my God, Sharon, here's what he's doing now.
Yeah.
And she'd talk you off the ledge. Or there was the other game we'd play, and I'll give this one up, Sharon, where it got to the point where you would act things out to help control him. So for example, if you get to an airline counter and they're going to close the plane door, and you know he's going to get upset, you go to the counter and act like an absolute maniac so that he's saying, calm down, don't get crazy. And then you get on and it's all fine. Or you get to LAX for a congressional fundraiser, so there was no advance because we were still in the government, and there's no car there. So you get on a payphone in those days next to a glass wall, screaming at the phone, telling Sharon, I'm going to scream now, just listen. Scream and yell as if you're yelling at the campaign because the car's not there. Jack gets, calm down, why are you yelling at that way? They're never going to speak to me again, not knowing it's Sharon on the other end of the phone. Hang up, put him in a taxi, and then he tells the taxi driver how to get there. And he was right, but it was LA.
So speaking of that, so driving stories. Oh. Everybody's got a driving story. What's your all-time favorite driving story, Michael?
Well, we would compete on how quickly we could get from Rayburn to DCA. And to the little, at that point, we would go down.
Why did you both have to go?
Well, I would drive him out, and then I'd bring the car back usually.
Yeah.
Okay, so we competed. He was 7.5 minutes. I only got to 8 minutes. But we literally, for the 3.5, 4 years we were doing that, would compete and how fast we could race.
So he would clock it?
Oh, yeah, we'd watch ourselves. It was just
I mean, you would literally leave the office with 10 minutes before the plane was leaving. In those days, and Sharon would call ahead and say, he's coming. Yep. And they would hold the plane, but we would be doing 95 down Parkway.
He was so proud that he had found this little area down below where I guess the flight attendants went in, that he could sneak in that door. So he'd pull up and throw it into park, and car would jump, and he'd jump out and grab the bags, and he'd slide over and take one of the Thunderbirds. I think we had 2 or 3 of them in the course of my time there.
Did he have more than one car? I mean, he owned more than one?
No. When I came, Michael there was a big black Thunderbird, looked like a pimp mobile, and then we went.
I thought Thunderbirds were sports cars.
No, not then. And then we got the silver one that I drove down from Buffalo, and I think there was another one. I can't be sure.
He loved the Thunderbird. The one that I remember, and there were a handful of, or many times in the campaign that we got lost. And so, I mean, you didn't have GPS back then, and so I remember one going to Rich Fox, I think Dick Fox's in Philly, and we were lost for a half hour. We were late for the meeting and late for the fundraiser, and that was a bad one. But the one that really sticks out is we were in Iowa, and they shut down the highway for Vice President Bush. And we were sitting in an interstate, just sitting literally for 45 minutes. They had shut it down.
Really?
And he did not. None of us understood it. He was supposed to be somewhere as well, but they shut the entire interstate down for 45 minutes.
That's a good way to get votes.
Yeah. And the minute it walked, the minute the motorcade came by, we were released. But he was frustrated with that one, and it was my fault, I think.
The issue of driving was always a huge thing at HUD, at Empower America. It got to the point at Empower America where we had to come up with a plan because we were having arguments on a daily basis with Jack about this. So finally, we drew up a sheet and had it typed up by the scheduler. It said, drive time from Green Tree Road to Dulles, from Green Tree Road to National. And there were 1 or 2 other locations we put on there. And Sharon and Bill and I walked into his office and said, would you please read this and sign it? Because every day he would argue with us about how long it took to get somewhere. And we said, this is going to be the formula for your schedule for all the future years that we're doing this. You know, there are certain points A to point B that we drive all the time, and every time you complain that our timing's wrong. This is what you've said it should be. We're now going to schedule according to this. And we made him initial it. It also got to the point where we'd argue over flight options a lot, and we would do the same thing. It got to be standard routine practice that once he would agree to a flight, I would get it typed up by the scheduler and bring it in and have him initial it. So as we got to flight day, he'd say, why am I on this flight? Why are we leaving earlier? Why are we leaving later? So because you picked him.
It actually carried into when he ran for VP as well. One of the good stories is he was having a disagreement with his advisors on the plane, so there was a heated discussion on the plane. We get off the plane, the camera crews come up, and he's still having a heated discussion with 1 or 2 advisors and myself. Get into the car thinking there's a 10-minute drive time from the plane to the event. And Joanne was in the car with me, in the limo actually, the big armored limo. And 10 minutes turned into 15, turned into 20, and he and I started going at it. And that's the one time I took Bill's advice and started screaming back at him. And we got to the event, and we were ready to open the door. I said, "Do you have what choice? We can continue this. We can open the door, continue this disagreement, or you can just shut up and deal with this and go out and deal with the cameras." And he chose the latter, and everything was all good. But you actually had to upstage him or one-up him on the anger side of things.
I mean, you had to have a thick skin to work for this guy.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Developed it.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, screaming.
And
Screaming.
Screaming.
I'm running
I
for
have to
vice
ask,
pre- I'm
is this screaming profanity? Screaming, you know, what the hell's going on here? What, I mean, this
No, there was profanity involved.
Well, not when Joanne was in the room.
Not when Joanne was there, no.
Never.
But
well,
it was
well,
loud.
let me. I was going to ask you this question later, but ask it now. What were Joanne's influences on Jack?
Saint.
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Calming.
Okay.
Calming.
Everybody,
Calming.
come on.
Yep.
So
Boss.
she calmed him down.
Calm him down. His behavior was completely different. The minute he would start to act up, she didn't even have to say anything other than occasionally Jack just look.
Right, yeah, you hear one word, Jack.
It stopped.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
I think the whole family had that impact on him as well. If he was traveling with his daughters, especially the sons, maybe not as much, but the daughters, especially Judith and Jennifer, had that impact as
Yep.
well.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing, we've been talking about how important, you know, people in the inner cities were, but his family came first. I mean, everything was
Absolutely.
about the family. We hadn't talked about that too much, but
Yeah. Okay.
everything was about
so
the
that
family.
means that you had to get back for games and stuff like
Games,
For games.
whatever.
Absolutely.
that. Right. So
Well,
that.
not only did you have to get back for games, but there was really an unwritten rule that if you entered into this campaign and you said anything negative about the Kemp family, from Uncle Tom to the daughters to to anybody, you were pretty much gone. And so
I mean, what staffer would say anything bad about?
No, I don't know that anybody did. If they were there, they weren't there very long.
Outsiders.
But it was an unwritten rule that it was just, you knew that was sacred, and
So,
everybody
but-
lived by it.
But give me some other examples of Joanne's calming or quieting effect, and also does Joanne have political input too?
Absolutely.
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 Talk about that.
We'll go back to '96 when I talked about that disagreement on the plane. You know, later we did the event, got back into the car, a little bit more screaming, back onto the plane with the advisors again, and the eruption started. Joanne and I took Jack back into this little private area in the very front of the plane. I let the two of them alone for about 5-10 minutes. He came back and apologized to everyone for his behavior. It was easy.
92 convention in his room just before the speech, as Rick early alluded to, want to rip Darman and Baker to shreds. If Joanne wasn't there, I'm not sure we would have, that speech could have been a lot more colorful than it was.
And if it had been, that would have been the
Joanne,
end of his cabinet career.
Okay, so Joanne intervenes with him to
Calm him down, get him to
that
see that,
extracted
right,
from
and
the speech.
get him to see other people's points of view. Before the 92 debate with Al Gore, Jude Wininski had placed a last-minute phone call and done what only Jude could do, and it was Joanne who
96.
No, oh yeah, 96,
96,
the Gore debate, and it was Joanne who got him to, take the Jude stuff and put it in the compartment where it belonged, as opposed to out there.
What was the Jude stuff going to be?
Jude was into the mommy party and the daddy party. Republicans were the daddy, hand out the punishment. Democrats were the mommy, hand out the gifts. And Jude was advising Jack to go in there and basically apologize for Bob Dole being the daddy party, which wasn't going to happen. And that was one example that stuck out in my mind, that if Joanne wasn't there, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Every
What would
night
have come out of
after
that?
5 or 6 days of grueling debate prep, Joanne would take him aside at the end of the day and just go through everything with him and make sure that he was in a much better place, because what not a lot of folks realize, I think Bill and Rick are the only other two here, and Joanne as well, is that we crammed a lot in 6 days. And we realized at the onset of the debate prep, Bill remembers getting the call, and Rick was there, that, that Jack couldn't get his responses into 30, 60, 90-second answers. And so we had a problem on our hands. So for the next 5 or 6 days, not only did we have the Jude stuff to tackle and the other controversies to tackle, which Joanne handled, we also had this programming issue. So at the end of every day, he would play tennis with me, and we've got a couple other stories. And then into Joanne, and where Joanne would calm him down and get him focused and get ready for the next day, which is just important. Because
so just let me understand this. So you all are sitting around talking about what Jack is going to do in the debate or in his nominating speech. What was 96?
In the debate, not the nominating speech.
When is he going to? He's going to beat up on Darman and Baker in the 92 convention speech.
Correct.
Right. And so you're sitting around talking about what's in the speech, and tell me how that discussion goes.
Well, there were multiple discussions.
Right, but the big one, when I can't remember who made the call to Jack in the suite to let him know that here's what Darman and Baker were saying, that hey, second administration, you're out the door. We didn't even speak yet. And first off, to get us to Houston, they made our life as fairly complicated, I think Sharon would agree, as possible in terms of bringing staff to Houston, what our role was going to be. So we went out and did our own thing, which is how the 40,000 posters got there. But then when this word came down, Jack in the speech was looking for, where am I going to hit them? I've got to take them on, because if they're going to get rid of me, let it be on my terms. And I remember in the room were Kevin Stack, Mary Burnett, myself, Rick, Sharon, Joanne, and he was ticked off. And when he got ticked,
he was furious.
He was like a volcano for a while. And the only person who cut through was Joanne, as she's telling him, listen. There was one segment of the speech which was not related to that, where he didn't listen. And it was the Syracuse Housing Project. I can't remember the woman's name. There's an African-American woman who was a deputy in the Syracuse Housing Authority. And Jack was going to mention this great thing she did. And we had gotten word that the then Democrat mayor of Syracuse let it be known that if she's in a Kemp speech at the convention, she's fired. And that was the only time I saw we couldn't have an effect. And even Joanne weighing in there, because we were begging, don't say it. He said it. It was not pretty afterwards. It all got fixed, but that was the kind of influence she'd have, is get him to have an open mind. Mm-hmm. And then together with her, in combination with, when appropriate, Tom Kemp, could get Jack to see the bigger picture.
Let me understand, though. You had gotten word in advance of the 92 convention that you were going to be out if there was a second term?
Darman and Baker were discussing that the second term, the one cabinet officer gone is Kemp. And that was making the buzz of the press rounds. And we were hearing it from other places. And then somebody had called into the suite and actually gave a description of a conversation that took place.
It actually got so bad that, that they were in the cabinet box at the convention and started passing notes, Darman and Kemp. And the tone of the notes was escalating and escalating and escalating.
Like what?
Well, I didn't see the notes. I could just see that that they were both getting really steamed. It got to the point where we pulled Jack out of the box early because he was going to punch him. I swear he was going to whack him or come close to a confrontation that would have been picked up on camera. Perhaps he wouldn't have hauled off and punched him per se, but there was going to be at least a big confrontation in the cabinet box. We pulled him out and left early. Called up the motorcade and left.
Did he tell you what that was all about?
He didn't tell me. He told others. But
yeah, so what was it all about? What were the?
It was about the budget.
It was about the budget. It was about the speech. It was about Bush breaking the no taxes pledge.
That's right.
With Darman, it was Darman's budget green eye shade look at it, and Jack saying you're going to kill us, and then throw in a little chemistry of Nick Brady and light bulbs and tires, which literally did happen in a cabinet meeting, of these are our economic indicators, is Jack saying, hey, we're going off a cliff. These guys don't see we're going off a cliff. Where are we being sent? We're going to states like Indiana. which means they know they're in Republican trouble. And he's trying to get their attention. So we get to the convention, and Jack's worried about, in the speech, what's Bush going to say? And he was battling for what he believed were the right ideas. And Darman liked to zing him and get under his skin. And I don't remember the exact quotes and stuff, but it was all playground stuff, and Jack didn't do playground. And he took offense at his childish behavior. And then you add in the chemistry what helps stoke it, and Sharon may remember this. In the cabinet box, this guest suddenly appears and sits down named Jude Wininsky. And Jude got under Darman's skin as bad as Darman got under Jack's skin. So now it's really rolling. Russert sees it. He knows all the players. So he's got to pass his comments on, and it just escalated.
I'd like to give one more example, and this was an important one, of Joanne's helping temper Jack. It was at the very end of the '96 campaign, and Bob Dole was on his 96-hour campaign, where he came up with the idea himself, and he said, I'm going to campaign for the last 96 hours. Now, when I say that, I mean non-stop. He was going to keep doing events for 96 hours and not rest, not sleep. And we were not doing the same thing on the VP campaign, and we came to a hotel in California, and Jack said to JT, who was his, JT, as we've already referenced, was his aide in that campaign. He came out of retirement to do that. He said, all right, I'll meet you in 15 minutes. I said, whoa, 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 wait a minute, where are you guys going? He said, we're going to play tennis. And I said, no, Jack, you can't play tennis. Bob Dole's going to a bowling alley at 3 o'clock in the morning in Las Vegas. You can't, we got a traveling press corps. You cannot be filmed playing tennis while Bob Dole, who's at the top of the ticket, is working 24 hours a day. And we had another one of our arguments, and he said, I'm going to play tennis, I'm going to play tennis. Look, we all know what's going to happen. I'm going to play tennis. Well, he went back to the suite, and Joanne calmed him down and said, they're right, you can't go play tennis. So he didn't, thank goodness. But Joanne is the one that convinced him, I believe, behind closed doors.
So I wouldn't say that it was always easy. Yeah. Joanne, there were quite a few give and takes.
Yeah. Well, Jack never thought he was wrong.
Yeah. So tell me about the relationship of Jack Kemp and Bob Dole over time. I mean, he obviously, you guys were more than just, coat carriers. You obviously were friends and political allies, and you told him what to think, and he obviously told you what he thought about other people. So tell me what he thought about Bob Dole over time.
Well, during the '96 campaign, we spent a lot of time with Senator Dole and to a lesser degree Mrs. Dole, and it appeared to me, and I believe from what I've heard Jack say, that both Senator and Mrs. Dole, well, now Senator and Senator Dole, and Jack and Joanne actually became very good friends, and this extended beyond the end of the campaign. I never heard him badmouth Bob Dole on the airplane or anything of that nature. I think he respected him. And he respected the fact that he was the nominee for president, and I believe Jack was very grateful that he'd been selected as the nominee for vice president. And so he was respectful of Senator Dole. In all the interfaces that I saw, and there were a lot of them in that campaign, as a matter of fact, I think more than usual, there were times when the two planes would come together and we'd go on board Senator Dole's plane and we'd have meetings. There were very few of us who went, but they had a very cordial and good working relationship.
During our time at HUD, I'd say it was probably strained, to put it mildly. I think that was probably a residual from the '88 race. But at HUD, Jack would try outreach. Bob would stiff arm us, and Sharon may remember this one, is Bob's daughter, Robin, was I think at the Realtors then. And she came in with a request, and we were going to deep six it, and it was Jack who saw the opportunity, saying, hey, it's Robin Dole, it's Bob's daughter, kids asking for it, we're doing it. And we did it, and from my seat, it was always chilly. Bob Dole was the green eye shade, couldn't stand supply siders, Senate Majority Leader. He respected Jack as a thinker, but did not agree with his philosophy. Probably dismissed us in other terms behind closed doors.
The quarterback.
Yeah, along with other things. And that relationship, I think, took another turn in '95 when Forbes entered the race against Dole late after Labor Day. and at Joanne and Judith's good graces, Jack kind of saw the benefit of endorsing Steve Forbes for president, which I'm sure just made Bob Dole's day, but still he chose him for vice president. So I'd say the relationship probably grew to where Rick and JT can speak to it in '96 of what it was. But before that, I would say it was tenuous.
The turning point, in my opinion, and Joanne's probably the best one to speak to this, is when they did the joint event in Kansas at Bob Dole's house, and they went down to the basement and looked at a number of photos and sort of the history of the Dole family and Bob Dole's war story. And I think that really changed Jack. And that's one of the first things. I joined the campaign 2 or 3 days after that, and that's one of the first things he sat down and told me. We had some time together, and he just told me all about the announcement, the visit to Dole's house, and how much that meant to him, and how he was going to spend every waking minute trying to get this man elected. And throughout the campaign, I remember conversation after conversation with Dole, including missives he would write to the senator before the debates, and at critical junctures throughout the campaign, that he just thought incredibly highly of the man and tried to influence him to the best of his ability.
So I guess the two Michaels were there in the days when Jack was promoting Kemp Roth and Bob Dole was opposing Kemp Roth. What conversations did you have with Jack about Dole in those days?
I don't think we were the ones having the conversations very often at that point. We were the get-around guys, but.
Well, I mean, the irony for me was, it was, you know, and John Mueller's here, who was very active in the economic policy, and one of the funny things was, I don't know about the rest of it, but Michael and I would work on little bits of legislation here and there. So I'm dealing with Orrin Hatch's office on promoting a bill that had been introduced like for 10 years and had never gotten 10 congressional rounds and never gotten anywhere. And it was the National Ski Patrol bill, the granted federal charter of the National Ski Patrol. And it was a minor thing, but it helped the ski patrol and saved them a lot of money if they could register once as opposed to in every state. So Jack says, yeah, why don't you do that? So at the end of the congressional session, he stands up and he looks and he goes, the only bill we passed was the National Ski Patrol bill with all this great economic legislation going on. And, and he was almost mad about it. And then later, I got this little note from him on the actual bill that said, hey, great job, and, wrote a note. But it was literally that year was the only, not much gets through Congress anyway, as we all know. But we actually got that one passed on both the Senate and the House. So it was enacted into law.
Okay. Tell me 1988 travel stories. I mean, clearly it was not a successful campaign, but how did you, you knocked yourselves out, right?
Yeah, we knocked ourselves out. I mean, it was a large field, so Pat Robertson was a big player and probably took a lot of the steam out of the Jack Kemp campaign. But then you had Pete DuPont as well, and we're talking about '88 with Dole. I think it was frosty from then on. I don't know what it was before, but he was a competitor, and so the '88 we put a lot of miles in. We crisscrossed Iowa and New Hampshire. I believe I traveled to 46 states with him during that '86 to '88 campaign. So he worked hard. It was a very, very difficult night in Iowa when we came in, I think, third, and then we went to New Hampshire. After New Hampshire's loss, we were somewhere around 10 or 12% in both of those races, dedicated to go to South Carolina, at least see it through South Carolina, but steam was really out of the campaign. Fundraising was difficult. We did a lot of fundraising, private fundraising. He did not like to do fundraising. He would not make those phone calls, and he had a lot of very strong support throughout the country, especially in Southern California and some in the New York area. But we had a call list, and as you're on the road, you would not only sit him down and you'd get some downtime to make phone calls, which he found incredible ways not to make those phone calls. Somebody was calling him, or he had to do something or something. So you get the last 10 minutes, and by the time you're through it, you just dial the phone. You get Barron Hilton on the phone and say, Jack, Barron Hilton's on the phone. No, Barron Hilton's on the phone. And so the travel was intense, 6 days a week. He loved it when family joined. His brother joined. Jeff was very active. Jimmy was still in high school, and so we would definitely have to make all the Churchill football games to the best of our ability, and that was a priority. But it was also on the road. It was a pretty thin staff. There was considering the staff that others had. Vice President Bush was traveling with an entourage. Dole had a fairly large entourage. Pete DuPont flew in a big plane, and Pat Robertson came in his 727. And so
What did you have?
we flew different planes. We flew King Airs. Rarely flew commercial, but we flew King Airs, Hawkers, through a number of different supporters.
Which one of us was you? One of you said that you were with him in 2 almost plane crashes.
Well, I was in
that all about?
helicopters.
Well, we had the helicopter incident,
Oh,
and
okay.
we were on the runway. This was in '84 when we were doing all the cities, and we were at Dulles, and it was a Learjet, and just the 2 of us, and the pilot looks back and says, "You guys ready to go?" "Yes, sir." "All right." Start to go, and the Learjet, you're like this. And the next thing, our heads were in our laps because the truck had gone across the runway in front of us, and the guy was doing everything he could to stop the jet. I mean, I swear to God, it was nasty. But literally turned around. The pilot says, "You guys all right?" We turned around, and Jack said, "Let's get out of here. Let's go." And turned around and took off again.
We had
He was a white knuckle flyer.
He was.
He was a white knuckle flyer.
Absolutely.
We had a King Air that an engine went out for maybe 12, 15 seconds, seemed like an eternity. But, the wing dropped and he did one of these. We all did one of these, and nothing was said after that. And the one plane trip that I remember, we were flying into Traverse City, Michigan, and it was a big event before the caucuses up there, I believe. And we were on Norm Brayman's plane, and his pilots became good friends of mine because of all the hustle and bustle we had to do. And it was a snowstorm, and they said, "We can't get in." And Jack says, "No, we got to get in. We got to get there. We can't get in." So I'm whispering in their ear, and he's yelling, and they're saying, "Ed, we can't get in." Well, they land this plane in Traverse City and slam on the brakes, and it's a whiteout. You just slam on the brakes because they don't know if they're on the runway or not. 15 minutes later, somebody taps on the windshield of this Learjet and says, "We'll follow you," opens the window, "We'll follow you." And so we followed this plane. That's how some of the risks that they take, as many times as they're in the air. It was just amazing. You couldn't see 1 inch outside of the windshield.
This was Jack who insisted that you had to fly it.
He was pushing, yeah. He wanted to get the event. He didn't quite understand. I think none of us did, except the pilots, the severity of the weather. The airport was closed. They probably, hopefully they're retired by now, but probably could have been taking their license away because it was very risky.
So I mean, Jack was a legendary optimist, but when you started losing in '88, did he express discouragement at all? I mean,
boy, not in the public. Not from my perspective. Not in the public. Yeah, I mean, you could see moments in private that he was strained. We had, when we were in town, we had Saturday morning kitchen cabinet meetings, if you will, that Tom, his brother, was in for most of the time, and you could see some frustration. You could see some despair inside those groups, but certainly an optimist, as you suggest. I mean, he never really, that I saw, made it public. He was always upbeat. He always thought we were going to win the next election.
Yeah. So in the '96 race, let me ask: if Dole is doing a 96-hour straight run, why wouldn't his vice presidential candidate do the same to match him? I mean, why did he not do it?
Well, number one, Senator Dole did not ask us to. Number two, I thought I didn't think it made sense to do that. I think a candidate that is totally exhausted is prone to make mistakes, and I didn't see the benefit of it. Frankly, the polling data was not too good by the time we'd gotten to the last 5 days of the campaign. And I just don't believe in pushing a candidate that way. I thought it was counterproductive. It was all Bob Dole. His staff didn't want to do it. They didn't want him to do it, but they also didn't want to do it themselves. And we just were not under pressure from Senator Dole to do it, and it made no sense to me to do it. So, I mean, we maintained long scheduled days. I'm not suggesting that we went to the beach or anything like that. I mean, when he was going to meet JT to play tennis at 10:30 at night on a lighted court in the back seat in the backyard of the Hyatt Regency Irvine or something like that, but it wasn't, you know, noon. But so we worked from 8 in the morning till 10:30 or 11 at night. But I thought it was pointless to try and do things, especially since we were the vice presidential candidate. And we don't get the network coverage that the presidential nominee gets. We're lucky to get local and regional coverage, and we're going to get nothing after 10 o'clock at night. There was no benefit to it as the vice presidential nominee. None. We wouldn't have gotten any press coverage.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of been a lot of chatter ever since the '96 debate about, you know, Jack's performance and all that, and the amount of preparation that he did. Mm-hmm. What is your version of what happened in that debate?
Day one, we're in Florida at Bob Dole's condo, if I'm not mistaken, for debate prep. Senator Judd Gregg is playing Al Gore, and all the advisors in a room. Gregg and Kemp are up at the podiums. And the debate starts, the mock debate starts, and within 15 or 20 minutes, Senator Gregg had, let's just say, run circles around Jack. And we cut the debate prep short and realized that we had a problem on our hands. And it goes back to what I said, couldn't get his. Jack would love to say that it took him 60 or 90 seconds to use a verb, let alone answer a question.
To clear his throat.
To clear his
throat.
Right.
Yes.
Clear his throat.
And so the issue became, again, for the next 5 or 6 days, hold in, you know, when you thought that you would be doing a few events and doing a number of other things, we were holed in with advisors. Bill, did you fly in for that?
Yep. Yeah. I had the stopwatch, which he wanted to wrap
for
around
the
my
next
neck.
5 days, it was, all right, we know you know the answers. Now let's get them in this format. And that's all we spent the next 5 or 6 days on. And one of my not so favorite stories is the morning of the debate. I woke up. I always had the room adjoining Jack and Joanne's. Walked over and I would bring the papers in and have coffee with them. And Jack immediately would start in. You know, what's in the news? What are you hearing? And for the first time, he hadn't said a word to me. In 5 minutes, he was just reading his paper. And finally, I said, I couldn't take it any longer. I said, Jack, you know, how are you feeling? And he flips the paper down, looks at me, and says, my mind is mush, and then flips the paper back up and starts to read again. And that's when I knew that we had a problem on our hands.
Because he was been over-prepared?
Well, if I could say, because I wasn't on the campaign, but I came down for the last 2 days of that prep at the Don Cesar, I think is where it was. And so I sat in on that prep. I think not only was he inundated with information, it wasn't what he wanted to say.
Yep.
It wasn't Jack Kempian. And he was, yes, he'd been in debates. He was concerned about the sound bites. He was concerned about the timing. But it really, truly, as I sat in the corner watching it, it wasn't about what he wanted to say.
Yeah. Was he supposed to do attack dog stuff, which was not in his nature?
You know, they let up on him on that. I think they gave him
originally.
I think later they got, but he wasn't. You know, that's part of the conversation he would have with Dole and Scott Reed and others. That there were times when he wanted to go in and defend Dole, and he would. And you know, Jack could never be an attack dog. Let's be honest. But he could do something with a smile on his face and try to go after policy instead of people.
So after the debate was over, how did he react?
I think it's safe to say he knew it wasn't his best performance and acknowleded it.
I mean, I was the first one to see him coming off stage, and I could assure you he knew.
Yeah.
What did he say?
He just said, well, what'd you think? I didn't think that was my best day.
Yeah. Same thing.
And what kind of feedback did you get from the Dole campaign, and how soon afterwards?
I didn't get any feedback from the Dole campaign.
How much did he get back, or did you all?
I think it was probably Scott that reached out first and was probably fairly mild with it, but just said, you know, hey, you know, we'll do better or something to that effect. But everybody got it.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody felt it was left in the locker room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let me ask about Empower America. So,
by the way, he did get a call from Jude in the holding room just before we went on stage,
and
that was probably not a good thing.
I thought there was a rule in the campaign that he was not to have a cell phone because Jude would
It
be
wasn't
on
a
the
cell
other.
phone. Somehow we had a drop in the
A hard line on the
a
stage.
hard line
behind
in
the
the
stage.
in the holding room,
Yeah.
which you always do in a debate on the general election campaign. And somehow that phone rang, and it was Jack answered it, and it was Jude.
Yeah,
And what did
remember
Jude
that.
tell him?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't on the
No
line.
one knows, but it was Jude.
That's interesting.
And I had to cut it off. One of us cut
I
it
cut
off.
it off.
You cut it off because
Because
Number one, he wasn't supposed to be taking any phone calls, and number two,
It was
we didn't
Jude.
want him talking to Jude.
10 minutes
why
before
didn't
the
you want
debate.
him talking to Jude?
Because we'd spent a great deal of time preparing him for this debate, and the last thing we wanted was, and this is the
Learn
way it is
something
with
else
any
out of it.
candidate, not just Jack Kemp, the last thing you want is somebody who was outside your debate prep calling in to second guess what you've just been doing for days preparing your candidate for a debate. You want the candidate to be focused, and you want him to remember. Joanne was in the room till the last few minutes, and then she, as happens with every one of these debates, and you've been in a lot of them, you know that there's a timeline you have to follow, and the spouse has to go out at a certain time, and then you just keep your candidate relaxed and pumped until you actually walk him to the side of the stage. And you don't want him talking to anybody outside the organization, regardless of how
And
friendly
Jude was
they are.
not a calming influence by any stretch. He'd have 100 ideas, 99 are horrible. You never knew when he was going to get to the one good one. You don't want him hearing that just before the
So how
debate.
influential with Jack was Jude over time?
From my limited exposure, I'd say he was influential in getting Jack to think of other things and perspectives, but Jack was very good at going through what was bad about Jude
Filtering.
or what may have been Jude's other agenda versus what Jack truly believed. But I thought he was helpful in being thought-provoking, and occasionally, 1 out of 100, maybe 1 out of 1,000, there'd be a little nugget.
But in the '88 campaign, he talked to him almost daily. So he was influential, whether good or bad. He was influential.
Was he on the plane with you?
Very rarely. Rarely.
He
I was
talked
gonna
to
say
him a
in the
lot in the
congressional
'96
days.
campaign, too.
But it goes back a long way because in the congressional days, he was in the office all the time.
All the time.
They were good friends.
There was a period at Empower America, I think, for maybe 2 years or 3, when it was isolation. Jude did not call. He'd try and get in, but never got through.
What was that about?
I can't remember what tipped it off. It may have been some policy thing with other outside advisors, and Jude tried to put Jack in a difficult position. So when he couldn't get through with calls, in those days faxes were the hottest, latest thing. So he'd jam our fax machine to the point we'd unplug it because it was Jude round the clock.
And what about Arthur Laffer?
He was around all the time as well.
Okay. And so who else would you say were influentials on Jack? Close,
Ed
you know,
Fuller.
important.
Back then, even Stockman, David Stockman,
back then.
so very close.
Well, when
And
Stockman,
when Stockman was a
when you went into
congressman.
the administration, then Stockman turns against supply-side economics.
Right.
How did Jack respond to that?
I was in the administration then, so I wasn't.
Okay.
Well, I would
terms
say
of
also
other-
Trent Lott, Newt Gingrich.
Right. Trent Lott,
And
Newt
Vin
Gingrich,
Weber.
Vin Weber,
Vin Weber,
Definitely
definitely.
Connie Mack, Jose Pinera.
Yeah.
Who's the guy, the third way? Peru,
Oh gosh.
South America.
Yeah, I'll think of it in a
He
second.
was hot for 2 or 3
Was
years.
it Peru or Chile?
No, Chile was Jose Pinera. The
Ah,
third
right.
way was Peru land reform.
Oh God.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll think of it. Okay, so we've talked about Darman. What about Baker? What was his? What did he say about Baker?
Well, not a lot because there wasn't much to consider. He thought Baker gave Bush bad advice. I think he respected Baker as a political figure and as a thinker to a degree, but in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of interaction with real people on real issues, I think Jack thought Baker left it at the law firm. I think he saw him more as a political operative for a candidate Bush as opposed to an effective Secretary of State.
And what about George H.W. Bush himself? I mean, he ran against him in 1988. Then he worked for him as HUD Secretary. What did he say about George Bush?
At HUD, I'd say he definitely, obviously, had an affection for him, not only because he had brought him into his cabinet, but he saw what a nice guy he was, and his heart was in the right place. Thought he probably had bad advisors around him on certain issues, but I found, and Sharon can attest to it better than I, he would constantly write him notes. Some of them were notes we would prefer he didn't write him, but it was always thoughtful in, hey, protect yourself, maybe look at this, this will help increase our base, this will increase your support, hey, look at the inner city. So I think there was not only a respect there, but I think a level of affection.
Especially in the later years. I mean, that actually, just like with Dole, in the late 90s and the 2000s, it was a genuine affection.
So how did they communicate in the later years?
Both phone and notes, but mainly by phone. They would be in a number of joint events together, and Jack would always come back saying, how fond he was of the presidents and how much he admired him. Again, more and more so later in life than early on.
Okay, so what have I not asked you that I should have, that the world needs to know about Jack Kemp? Or a story, or...
Well, Bill can tell it, but the one story that, maybe Jack's favorite stories, and Bill's probably best, or Rick, is when, in Jack, as many events as I did with him, would tell it constantly, and it's when they toured the inner city Washington with the Queen, and the Alice Fraser story. I mean, so it's just, going back to...
Let's hear.
Just going back to Jack's affinity and this passion for the inner cities. Go ahead, Rick.
No, go right ahead.
No, you know the story better than anyone.
Well, you know better.
No, you know it best, Rick. Plus your
It's
your
one of Jack's
natural
favorite
affection
stories.
for the Queen of Great Britain, the United Kingdom. Your blood goes back there, Rick.
Tell us.
Well,
That's not fair. That's just not
it
fair.
was just that the Queen was going to meet a common resident of I don't know the proper term to use, but a private citizen, a resident of the District of Columbia. And so she'd been fully briefed as to the proper etiquette when you meet the Queen of England, as to what you do, and as to the fact that you don't touch the Queen, and that you don't offer your hand to the Queen to shake hands with the Queen. I mean, there's a lot of protocol in the Crown of England, as we know. And so Alice had been fully briefed, and Jack's out there, as the interlocutor or the host, and Alice Fraser is this very friendly, outgoing woman.
Who was she?
She was a
regular
resident of public
housing in the
right,
District
yeah.
of Columbia. And Jack was showing, the Queen was interested in seeing some public housing in the area of the District of Columbia, as opposed to what the council housing, they call it in England, was like. And so Alice Fraser just comes right out and says, "Hello, Queen!" Queenie, I think she called it, and hugged her. She did not just reach out to shake her hand, but she hugged the Queen. So here's this large black lady, unprovoked, just goes over to the Queen of England and goes, "Oh, hello, it's so nice to meet you." And the Queen had this expression on her face like, "What is happening here?" And Jack thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. Everybody else's jaws were dropping.
But then what Jack would be fond of saying is that the press would run up to Alice Fraser afterward and say, "Why in God's name would you violate all rules of protocol and hug the Queen?" He goes, "Well, because I wanted the Queen to see my palace." And that was Jack's, that was his tagline.
Right.
It's her palace, it was her home.
Jack told the story over and over again.
Jack told it
over and over again.
Would it not have been his favorite story?
It was.
And it's
yeah,
the
it was
American
his-
dream.
Yep.
We talk about the American dream. Alice Fraser's palace. This woman had 8 palaces and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet this woman wanted the Queen to see her.
She had
palace.
gotten
She was that excited.
to own her own home,
Own her own home.
and through some of Jack's initiatives at HUD.
Yeah.
Tell the Prince Charles story.
Oh, this is a classic one, and Joanne was there. Jack's going to have lunch with the Prince of Wales at his country home, Highgrove House. And so I went out ahead of time and scoped out where it was, and checked out the security situation, how early we'd have to be there. And I was over ahead of time working with the embassy and with the palace on the timing. And we were invited for lunch at 12 o'clock by Buckingham Palace, as confirmed by the embassy. And so we drive out to Highgrove House. It's a pretty good ride. You have to go all the way past Bath to get there. And we arrived a little early. So the police officers at the gate waved us in. There's a dirt path, a dirt road that runs up to the forecourt of his house. And it's a relatively modest home, which you'd think for the Prince of Wales is his country house. It wasn't a big manor house like you see in the television shows. And there's nobody there. And it's got a little mudroom in the front, a glass enclosed mudroom in the front. So we're early. Jack says, well, go tell him we're here. I said, well, Jack, we're early. And he said, well, go tell him we're here. And I said, well, we're early. And he said, just go tell him we're here. So this is not what you normally do at a royal household, but he insisted. So I went up to the front door of and there was a little doorbell thing. I rang it, and nothing happened. And I came back to the car. I said, well, nobody answered, but we're early. We're not expected till 12 o'clock. We're not supposed to go till 12. You don't go till 12. And so he said, well, go in and tell them we're here. So I said, I can't go in, not to mention the fact I've got the map of Ireland on my face, and the troubles are still going on. And so he said, well, go in and knock or do something. So I knocked on the door. There's no response. I turned around. He said, go in, go in. So I stepped into the mudroom and the front hall, and it's very interesting. There are dog bowls and muddy boots and all this stuff, because he's a gardener and spends a lot of time in the woods. And the front door was open into the house. And I knocked, and nothing happened. So I came back out again. I know this is redundant, but I was very reluctant to do this. And so he said, well, just go in and shout. Just go in and tell them we're here. I said, Jack, I can't. He said, just do it. He's getting perturbed. And so I literally knocked on the door again, and it swings open a little more. And here is the foyer of Prince Charles' home. And so good afternoon, good afternoon, hoping that a maid or somebody would come along and say, oh, who are you? So he kept saying, go in. So I stepped into the house, not knowing this is not the right thing to do, but there's a cross hall. There's a living room off to the left, and the dining room is off to the right, and it was all set for lunch. And I'm like, hello, good afternoon. And all of a sudden I hear these footsteps coming down a hall. It was a wooden floor. And a fellow in a military uniform shows up with his tunic off. So he looked like a Marine, but I wasn't sure. He was startled, and he said, good heavens, can I help you? And I said, good afternoon. My name's Rick Ahern. I'm here with Secretary Kemp. We're here for the noon luncheon with His Royal Highness. He said, oh, there seems to be some mistake. I said, no, sir, there's no mistake. We're invited for lunch at 12 o'clock with Prince Charles, and we're here. Secretary Kemp and Mrs. Kemp are out in the forecourt. And he says, well, I'll have to check on this. And I said, well, I've got a schedule right here that says 12 o'clock and the invitation from Buckingham Palace for 12 o'clock. So he runs into the back, he puts on his blouse, comes back. It turns out he's a major of Marines. And he says, there seems to be some mistake. Actually, Secretary Kemp was invited for 12:30. And I said, no, sir. Now I'm knowing. If I go back outside and say, Jack, we're 30 minutes early, he's going to say, how did you screw this up? Well, I didn't screw it up, because I had the documentation from the palace that said, from Buckingham Palace, that said 12 noon on this date. But his first inclination would be that I had followed it up. So I told the equerry, said, listen, I've got the communications right here from Buckingham Palace. I don't know what they sent you to Kensington Palace, but they sent us 12 noon at this house, and here we are. He says, well, His Royal Highness is not here. He's out in the gardens. And I said, well, would you mind telling him that Secretary and Mrs. Kemp are here as the palace invited them? And so, to make a long story short, although it's a little late for that, he said, I said, well, what would you like us to do? And he said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, it'd be nice if we could wait somewhere, but if you want us to wait in the car, we'll wait in the car. He said, well, one moment. And he ran back into the house, and then he came forward and said, perhaps you'd like to wait in the garden. I said, we'd be happy to wait any way you want. The garden would be just fine. So we went into the back garden, and sure enough, Jack was on my case. How could this happen? How could this happen? How could this possibly happen? And I said, Jack, this is an English screw-up, not an American screw-up. And the guy from the embassy was with us, and he confirmed that we were on time. So finally, the prince came, And he was there about 12:30, and they had their lunch. But it was a classic moment where Jack insisted that I walk into the house of the Prince of Wales.
Okay, so we're sort of out of time, but I would like to ask you, so what lesson does Jack Kemp, since you all knew him intimately, have to teach the country and the Republican Party going forward? Well, we'll just go in the final order. Michael?
Talk to everybody, listen to everybody, and try to work with everybody.
Civil discourse. It's communicating, less of a battle the way Washington is now, and being so polarized, and working together to actually get things done.
Did he have Democratic friends, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So who were his Democratic friends besides Charlie Rangel?
Speaker.
Yeah, Speaker Tib O'Neill. I mean, we would get things all day long. We were horse trading with O'Neill's office.
Yeah.
For one. I mean, but
we were
go
friends
down
with
the list.
staff, and Jack was friends with the speaker.
Yeah.
Optimism. I mean, 3 months before Jack died, when I came into town, I'd try and stop by and see him. And he was sick, and I'd asked to see him, but he wasn't going in the office much. So Jimmy had allowed me to go to the park where Jimmy and his kids were playing baseball, and Jack was there just sitting in the car watching his grandkids play baseball. And we had a 15-minute conversation about what's going on, where's the country, so forth and so on. And I'm a builder and developer in 2008. That wasn't a pretty 2009. That wasn't a pretty time. He said, one of the last things he said, "Don't worry, our best years are ahead of us."
Yeah, inclusion. I mean, he was just all about from day one, the very first day I met him, all the way up to the end. It was all about inclusion, optimism.
Okay, Rick?
I would echo what my friends have said and emphasize optimism, inclusion, expand the base of the Republican Party, bring more people in. Believe in your ideals, believe in your ideas. If you have a political philosophy and if you have an economic philosophy and you believe in it, you should never abandon it, no matter how strong the pressures are. And the other is the value of friendship. Once you became a friend of Jack Kemp's, you were a friend for life, as I think all of we were blessed to be. He was very, very true to his friends. No matter how long their friendship existed, it was something that he valued extremely highly, and I think that's a great ideal to follow.
Let me just ask you one question. Some people have said that he was friendly, but that it was hard to be intimate with him. Is that true or not? That there was some sort of sense of distance. Some people say that.
That certainly wasn't my experience.
I think if you were close to him, that wasn't the case.
As a staff person, you were staff, but after, like I said when I left, I mean, I had a great relationship right up with him to the end.
I mean, even as staff, though, the thing that would come second to family, of course, is Monday night or Sunday night football. And so after a long day, you'd be in the suite or in the room, wherever you were in the country, watching whatever game was on. And
with
just
him.
With him.
Yeah.
And he welcomed your
Absolutely.
company. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. He welcomed your presence.
So that is definitely contrary to what you're hearing.
And it's true that we always recognized that we were his staff. We were not his co-equals, but he treated us in many respects as equals. He never talked down to anyone in my presence. There was a member of his staff. He, especially those of us who were with him all the time, and those who worked for him for a long period of time, he made you feel, when you weren't disagreeing on things, he made you feel very, very comfortable and very much at ease in his presence.
And empowered.
I think the biggest strengths I saw walking away from a distance is compassion, particularly for those less fortunate, but for everyone, and then continuous and ongoing curiosity.
Yeah.
Don't be worried about having the answer, be worried about having the right question to keep growing, learning, and expanding, and it's something we can all learn today.
Right.
And be a leader. That was his phrase.
Oh, yes. Right.
Leadership, right.
Okay. Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful occasion.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank
We're
you.
done.
Thank you.
Thank you.